Dr. Bombi, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Richard. Good to be here. Thank you.
Are you, Dr. Bombi, are you as curious as I am about how the general public is going to behave over the Memorial Day weekend?
Richard, all I can do is bring the facts to the table. How those facts are assimilated and how people adopted them is a choice they have. You started off by saying that there's a difference between flu virus and the coronavirus. And that's a factually correct statement because the flu virus has been with us for millennia. It's been with us for a few thousand years. So what that translates into is that most of the population has been exposed and there's a certain amount of immunity from prior infections. Also, we have treatments for flu virus, which is Tamiflu, and other medications. And over and above, we have a vaccine for flu. This virus, being a novel virus, has none of the benefits for the populace. Also, over the last 90 days or so, with significant exposure in USA, we have accumulated data that can be guideposts for us to behave in a certain way to minimize the lethality of the virus. The way the virus has behaved, you can say it has duality in its lethality. If you segment the population in two categories, based on the New York City data, 65 and under, without any comorbidities, and people with comorbidities or advanced age beyond 65, there's a huge disparity in the favor of sick and old. The younger people, all the way up to 65, if you look at the data, have a case fatality rate of 0.3%, meaning in New York, they had 190,000 roughly cases. Out of the 190,000, 690 people were age 65 or younger without any comorbidities or pre-existing conditions died. That gives us a very small death rate of 0.3% in that population. But if you expand the denominator based on the antibody studies that are conducted, according to that data, they have 1.7 million people potentially infected. Now, there are flaws in the data, but let's accept it on the face value. So if there are 1.7 million people infected, out of which 690 die, in age group 65 or less without comorbidities, that tells you that this virus doesn't have the lethality in a large segment of population. So that gives us an out. That gives us an out that people who are less vulnerable shouldn't be made to stay at home or in lockdown. They should go back to work. And as we previously discussed on your segment, that at the end of the day, herd immunity is our ticket to solution along with vaccine as and when it emerges. So yes, there are significant differences between flu and coronavirus, but also there are advantages of the knowledge we have accumulated in the last 90 days that it hurts the people who are sick, it hurts the people who are older. If we can segment those people, shield those people, protect them, we should be able to safely open up the society. But having said that, I have a kind of a agreement with the concerns you had to begin with that the Memorial Day weekend will present significant opportunities for the virus to expand exponentially. The reason I say that is there was a study in Australia, it just came out today. So if you have a possibility of coronavirus spread without large gatherings, say less than 50, the possibility of an infection going to 100 in 100 days to 100 is 100 days. If you have 50 or so, that 100 changes to 10,000. If you have a large gathering, that changes to 1 million because the virus spreads exponentially. So if we are going to shed the established helpful guidelines we have received, we have learned from the viral behavior, we will expose ourselves to exponential spread, and that will defeat the purpose and the success of the flattening of the curve we have worked so hard for.
It's interesting, Dr. Bomby, what I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, that if you have a group of 1,000 otherwise healthy young people, right, who gather without any social distancing or the norms, because of the low, the chances are unlikely that they're going to get sick and die, they're going to be fine. But as they spread the virus, the danger is them shedding the virus to more vulnerable populations. Is that correct?
That's part of the answer. Exactly. But the other things are, there are other potential negative things. One is the exponential growth of the infection rate. So just imagine if 1,000 people or whatever number collects, 100 days from then, the potential population that can be infected is at 1 million. So that basically takes away all the advantages of flattening, because if we have such a large amount of population that's exposed, there are downstream consequences, which are serious sickness, critical sickness, death, and that will overwhelm the system. So it defeats that purpose. Secondly, when there's a large gathering, the two things we constantly talk about is dose and density. What happens is when a lot of people are close to each other and the duration of exposure is higher, the amount of infection is higher. And the higher amount of infection lends to more sick, more severity of sickness. Yes, larger numbers, more severe disease, overwhelms the system, defeats and squanders away all the advantages of a flattening of the curve. So the science tells us, please do not collect in numbers that exceed, let's say, 10 or so, and please practice distancing measures, safe distancing, hygiene, hand washing, and face mask.
Well, Dr. Bomby, how would you avoid that inevitable spread of the virus if you, let's say you don't have 1,000 people gathering at a Memorial Day weekend party, but you have 1,000 people going back to work, as you suggested, because they are less likely to get sick. But yet, would you have the same issues with them spreading the virus there?
The notion behind that is that there will be social distancing. So all the workplaces will be compliant with the distancing, and I don't want to call social, I would like to suggest safe distancing. Social distancing is such a anguished, painful term. So if you maintain safe distancing, if you practice hygiene, you minimize. And again, we don't want to contain the spread of infection. We want to encourage the spread of infection in healthier population, so we build the herd immunity.
Yeah.
We want to discourage the co-mixing at a higher number that will defeat the purpose, because one, will lend exponential growth, two, will create more severe disease. So that defeats the purpose.
Oh, I see. Okay, we're talking to Dr. Bridge Bomby of Centric Health. Dr. Bomby, this is going to sound like a stupid question to you, but not to me. Do viruses ever totally go away? I mean, can you kill off a virus, or is this virus, even with a vaccine, still going to be like we have a flu vaccine, but there's different strains of flu? Will we always have some form of the COVID-19 to deal with?
It's increasingly possible that's our fate going forward, because we have other coronaviruses that cause cold. About 10 to 15% cases of common cold are caused by coronaviruses. So we had an opportunity to bury it in Wuhan, which we spectacularly failed on.
Yeah.
But because of global dissemination, it's hard to get rid of the virus. And one can always hope that this virus will mutate to self-destruction, but that's unlikely to happen. What's likely to happen is that we build immunity, and then we have the vaccine going forward, and thus we attenuate its virulence, its lethality. We just learn to live with it without thinking too hard about it like we do with flu.
Oh, wow, that's crazy. What would you, I mean, when you look forward, and I know that you don't have you're not the soothsayer, so to speak, but what is going to stick with us when we talk about how this is a life-changing event for our country and the world? When I look a year from now or 2 years from now, how do you think life might change because of this virus in the way that how restaurants operate, how we might operate? I mention that because there was a story in the Wall Street Journal today about a lot of the French are eschewing their normal greeting with the light kiss on the cheek and things like that, and how the small things about life that may change because of this. What do you expect, or is this a case of once we get an effective vaccine that maybe we'll move past it? What do you think?
So I'm going to quote Yogi Berra. The predictions are tough to make, especially about future. So I think we're blessed with a very short memory. Once we have enough tools on a pharmacologic side, in therapeutics, vaccine is there, I think the fear will eventually dissipate with some change in the trajectory of human relationships. I think some amount of safe distancing will be practiced by a lot of people, and some will deliberately ignore it just to make a point. Mm-hmm. I think the planes will be, they're adopting a lot of changes at TSA, for instance, the seating in the planes, the hotels, the restaurants. There will be structural changes that will be made to inspire confidence. So if you, basically, any environment you have, whether it's entertainment-driven, hospitality-driven, or office-based, any business-based, it has to be low-threat environment, and it has to be confidence-building environment. So as the threat attenuates going forward with all the pharmacologic means, all the vaccination, and the fact that we build immunity through infections, I think the threat will attenuate, human behavior will reemerge. At the end of the day, we are not social distancing humans. We are social humans. So we will find a way to connect, but it's going to be a little bit of a time.
Yeah, so interesting, so fascinating. Last question here for you. What about, we have these testing sites. If people want to get tested, they can get tested, both for the virus itself and then for the antibodies. What would you I run into people almost every day, Dr. Bombi, who tell me that they say things like this, and it happened to me last night. A friend of mine, a realtor, said, he goes, Rich, I think I had it because in March I had an incredible fever and it lasted 2 days and my stomach was upset and then it passed. Would you recommend all of us or some of us get the antibody test to determine where we are?
Let me segment that question in two different parts. One is the diagnostic testing, to know if somebody is actively shedding the virus. And that's very important in certain businesses. It's important, you could say, in every business, but in certain businesses like healthcare. So the last thing I want to do is be infected and infect my patients, because that'll violate my Hippocratic oath. But beyond that, I care of the population who is 65 and have multiple comorbidities. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, they won't come to me. So the last thing I want to do is be self-infected and infect them. So the diagnostic testing on a preventative basis makes a lot of sense in healthcare and in the first responders. It also makes a lot of sense in people who cater to nursing homes because that's a captive audience. And also you could extend that conversation to jails and prisons and other places where a lot of people can be exposed by super spreaders. In testing, there are a lot of new technologies that are coming out, and we can expand on that if and when time permits. So the antibody testing is a retro look. It's a retro look to see if any person has had the infection and thus has acquired immunity and thus is free from the further curses of the virus. A lot of us have been sick, and a lot of us have this magical thought that somehow we had the COVID and we got over it. My suspicion is that's just that. It's a magical thinking. The actual prevalence of antibodies in our country is probably about 1 or 2%. So the max you can extend based on everything is 5%. I think that's an extreme exaggeration, because there was a study that came out yesterday from LA that estimated the prevalence in a rather dense area at 4%, which I think is still flawed. I think that 4% number is very high too. So when you have the prevalence of infection that's so low, the test will over-exaggerate the antibody findings. In other words, if you have 5 people with antibodies positive, you can easily say 4 are false positive, meaning 80% of the people will be falsely led to the conclusion they've been infected and thus they are non-vulnerable. That would be wrong.
Why do you say that 4% sounds high?
Because of the testing deficiencies. A test has to be specific. In other words, for the test to give me 100% information, it has to have 100% specificity, meaning that if 100 people don't have the disease and the test detects 100% absence of the disease, that has 100% specificity in it. But there is no such test. There is a thing called pretest probability. It goes to the statistics a long time ago, in like late 18th century it was developed. It's called pretest probability. If in a population, the probability of disease is very low, in this case meaning infection and the antibodies is very low, and a test is conducted that has specificity that's not 100%, then the probability of that test being accurate is compromised. In other words, positive predictive value of the test is compromised, and you will get a lot of people who think they have the infection and thus have the antibodies and thus they are protected. It will be a flawed assumption.
Oh, interesting. So fascinating. Dr. Bridgebami, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. We're